Have you ever experienced a moment in which the world is in motion, but you are ensnared in a memory that you wish you could forget? The occasion was my sister's maternity shower. The patio was adorned with delicate blush pink balloons that sailed aloft. Floral linens were draped over the tables. Each corner was adorned with miniature teddy bear centerpieces. In the springtime air, the aroma of vanilla cupcakes and freshly cut roses wafted through, as laughter erupted around us. It ought to have been flawless. However, it evolved into a day that I will never forget, regardless of my efforts. Mia was radiant, 8 months expectant, and wore a flowing cream dress that perfectly complemented her belly. She was both proud and apprehensive, as she continued to brush her hands over her bump while her tresses were pinned up. I stood beside her, observing as she unwrapped a diminutive pair of crocheted infant booties. Her irises were illuminated. She showed a broad smile. It appeared for a brief moment that our family would be able to endure this moment without another individual disrupting it. However, I then observed my mother's expression. Darlene, my mother. She had a flawlessly pressed blouse, crossed her arms, and a sharp chin and tongue. She wore that recognizable grin, the one she always wore just before she threw a verbal explosive in the midst of a joyful moment. My innards contorted. I was acutely aware of that expression, and she delivered it without hesitation. She is a single mother who likely is unaware of the father's identity. I clenched my hands around the plastic tablecloth's edge. Hoping that I had misheard, I fixed my gaze on her. However, this was not the case. She casually stated it as if it were a jest or a punchline, as if she were commenting on the weather. Aunt Carol, the younger sister of Darlene, was always anxious to ride shotgun on Darlene's insults, and she chimed in, giggling. She is merely gathering sympathy gifts. I am convinced that the laughter that ensued was more boisterous than it truly was. The apprehensive titters and the snickers. I observed eyes alighting on one another, lips quivering, and an individual attempting to conceal a smirk behind a wine glass. Additionally, Nia? Her expression deteriorated. The infant onesie she was holding remained motionless in her hands. She blinked rapidly, causing her pupils to drop. After a brief moment of cracking, she reapplied her smile, as if it were a disguise that was not quite fitting. I refrained from uttering any words. I ought to have done so. I was so eager to do so. However, the words became stuck in my larynx, rendering them useless and sticky. I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears. My fingertips became wet. I gazed around, anticipating that someone else would intervene and offer a response. Anything. However, no one did. What was the reason for my silence? What caused my body to freeze? Was I so accustomed to my mother's cruelty that I simply accepted it? Micah, my son, was sitting calmly beside me. Despite being only 8 years old, he is already exceedingly perceptive for his age. His brow furrowed as he gazed up at me with those wide, pensive eyes, as if he was attempting to comprehend the events that had just transpired. He was unable to comprehend the language. Insufficiently. However, the tone was clearly comprehended by him. The unsightliness. I could detect a sensation of warmth emanating from my thorax. Shame and anger were inextricably linked. I was unable to discern the boundary between the two. I was unable to shake the thought that this was intended to be a celebration. What is the reason for allowing her to degrade it? However, the occasion has since passed. Nia cleared her throat and expressed gratitude to an individual for a gift that she had yet to examine. Visitors relocated. The conversation changed, but the tension remained in the air, dense and imperceptible. My mother beamed, completely satisfied. It is as though she would reinstate Nia in her proper position. However, she was unaware, and none of them were aware, that the most forceful voice in the yard did not belong to her. It belonged to my son. In a matter of minutes, he would serve as a reminder to all of the true nature of love. The baby shower had begun in a manner reminiscent of a Pinterest board. It was conducted in the garden of my cousin. A mimosa bar is concealed beneath a blossoming magnolia tree, and long wooden tables are adorned with white linen. Pink balloons are attached to the chairs. There were pastel cupcakes with miniature fondant rattles on top, as well as banners that read, "Welcome Baby Harper." Soft, acoustic renditions of classic pop songs emanated from a Bluetooth speaker. I arrived slightly tardy, balancing a diaper bag, a partially wrapped gift bag, and Micah, who was pleading for juice as soon as we exited the vehicle. As I endeavored to maintain my equilibrium, my heels penetrated the grass. This is the typical me. Undercaffeinated, overwhelmed, and endeavoring to maintain a positive attitude throughout the ordeal. Nevertheless, I was legitimately delighted to be present. Nia was entitled to this. My younger sister. Nia has consistently been the artist, the visionary, and the sensitive one. During her childhood, she composed poetry in spiral notebooks and wept during dog food commercials. The one who was the fixer, the mature one, the elder one, and the one who knew how to keep her head down when her mother was mean was me. The moment Nia discovered that she was expectant and the father abandoned her, I anticipated the outcome. Not from the world but from our own family, particularly from one's mother. Darlene has consistently conducted herself as though she were the head of our lives. A woman with a voice that is as sharp as steel and a set of high standards, she is the type of mother who perceives vulnerability as a sign of frailty and makes love seem like a possession that must be earned. Additionally, what about Aunt Carol? Her opinions are echoed by a subdued version of her, resembling a shadow with lipstick. I recall the phone call in which Nia informed me that she would be keeping the infant. Her voice was trembling. She continued to offer her apologies. For what purpose? For the sake of being human? For the purpose of requiring assistance? I conveyed to her that I was pleased of her, that she was courageous. The best thing that had ever occurred to her was this baby, this little girl growing inside her. She wept. I concurred. Therefore, I assumed responsibility when the concept of a maternity shower was proposed. I assisted in the selection of the visitor list and the distribution of the invitations. I desired to provide Nia with a single day, a single instance in which she felt as though she was of significance. In the same way, her decision was not an error. It was as though she was not alone. Additionally, it functioned for a brief period. She exuded a radiant glow as she greeted individuals, her cheekbones flushing and her laughter effortless. For the initial hour, even Mom maintained her opinions on a leash. However, the undercurrent was palpable. It is constant in my family's presence. The tension that you are unable to identify, but it pulsates beneath the surface like a subdued drumbeat. The tight smiles, the small silences between conversations, and the way people gaze when someone walks away all convey more than words. I was tense despite the fact that I was smiling. I experienced a tightening sensation in my larynx throughout the afternoon, as if I were anticipating an impact. I continued to monitor Micah, allowing him to consume ginger ale from a champagne flute in order to provide him with entertainment. He was in a small button-up shirt that I had ironed earlier that morning, and his hair had a single curl in the front that would not remain in place, regardless of the amount of gel I applied. He was my reassuring presence, a reminder that kindness still existed, and that I had not completely failed at this parenting thing. I believe he could detect my anxiety. He has always possessed this talent, as if he could discern the energy in a room more accurately than the majority of adults. He was also observing Nia, observing the manner in which her hands moved and the length of time she blinked when queried about her father. Although he had not yet spoken, his diminutive frame rested against mine as if he anticipated an imminent event. And God, something was. Such a rapid occurrence transpired. After opening a soft pink swaddle blanket from one of our former neighbors, Nia was laughing for a moment, and then there was silence. The type that does not simply fall. It plummets. My mother's voice cut through the conversation like a frigid wind in spring. At first, I was unable to perceive her visage. I only heard the words. She is a single mother who likely is unaware of the father's identity. The laughter that surrounded us came to a cessation in a domino effect, rather than all at once. A small number of individuals laughed. A small number of visitors pretended to be unaware of the conversation by gazing downward at their beverages. Other individuals were uncertain about how to respond, causing them to freeze in mid-smile. Nia was the object of my gaze. Her extremities ceased to function. For the first time in months, her shoulders, which had been languid, finally tensed. She did not even raise her head. She simply gazed downward at the infant item in her lap, blinking excessively. Aunt Carol's voice was subsequently incorporated into the blend, much like an aftershock. She is merely gathering sympathy gifts. Quite frankly, we should have organized a fundraiser for her rather than a celebration. My innards contorted. My pulse was palpable in my larynx. I was seated in a folding chair, and my nails were digging into the cheap plastic as my fingers grasped the armrest. Did they believe they were amusing? Due to the absence of laughter? Not really. A few nervous chuckles were heard. Those awkward reactions that individuals exhibit when they are uncertain whether to chuckle or flee. A few of our relations shifted in their seats. One woman, who I believe was Nia's colleague, maintained a courteous, frozen expression, as if she was uncertain whether the event was a party or a roast. I gazed at my mother. Her expression was composed, bordering on arrogant. She was enjoying an iced tea as if she had not just sucker-punched her own daughter in front of a multitude. I was tempted to shriek, but I refrained. My heart was pounding and my eyes were stinging as I sat there, ensnared in my own epidermis. The words were present, roiling within me, sharp and resonant, but they were unable to escape. My lips were pressed into a line so thin that I was concerned that I might draw blood, and my mandible was clenched. What was the cause of my habitual freezing? What was the reason that I was unable to express myself? This was not a novel concept. Darlene had always been this way, identifying the most vulnerable aspect of you and exerting immense pressure on it. She advised me that it was likely for the best when I divorced, as I was never a suitable choice for a wife. She stated that she appeared fatigued, akin to a woman who had become pregnant unintentionally upon the birth of Micah. Nevertheless, I permitted her entry. Nevertheless, I maintained my position at her table. Nevertheless, I permit my son to embrace her on every holiday. Due to my desire for tranquility, due to my desire for a family, due to my aversion to being the one to produce chaos. However, in that instant, as my sister sat there, humiliated, her hands still trembling over baby gifts she could scarcely afford to purchase for herself, I harbored self-loathing. My reticence was a source of great distress to me. Also, I could sense Micah's gaze upon me. His head was inclined as he gazed from me to Nia, to my mother, and back again, his tiny legs swinging from the chair and his juice cup cradled in both hands. He has not yet expressed any sentiments. However, a quiet form of fire was simmering in his irises. I had a sense that he would not remain silent for an extended period. Immediately thereafter, everything underwent a complete transformation. Micah was exceedingly reserved. He had not spoken since his mother's comment. There was no fidgeting, no muttering about cupcakes. He was simply sitting, his hands folded in his lap, and his eyes darting between Nia and me as if he were resolving a problem that only he could see. He then slipped off the chair without saying a word. I perceived a change in the atmosphere. "Micah?" I softly reached for his arm, whispering. However, he shook his head in a manner that was both calm and solemn, a state that no 8-year-old should be required to maintain. He stated, "I have something to give Aunt Nia." His voice was not particularly loud, but it penetrated the background din with the clarity of a bell. He attracted the attention of all. Conversations were terminated in the middle of a sentence. Forks were suspended in midair. I briefly observed my mother. She appeared bewildered. A few guests grinned, anticipating an amusing event. Micah traversed the grass, his sneakers gently crunching the blossoms that had been blown off the centerpieces. Right in front of Nia, he halted and reached into his diminutive backpack, which was one of the superhero backpacks he persisted on carrying all the time. He extracted a small box that was enveloped in crinkled blue paper and adorned with a crooked bow. The corners were meticulously sealed down, but it was evident that they were done by small hands. He also mentioned that I had brought a gift. It is a joint effort between my father and myself. I had forgotten how to breathe. Micah does not frequently discuss his father. It has been a sensitive and intricate subject since the divorce. However, whenever he does discuss him, it is always in a positive light. Considerate. He was never resentful, despite the fact that he had every reason to be. Nia placed her hand on her chest. She opened her mouth as if she intended to speak, but no sound emanated. Micah examined his surroundings. At the guests, at my mother, and then at his aunt. In addition, my father maintained that infants are exceptional and warrant affection, regardless of their circumstances. He advised me that if I ever encountered a child who was without a father, I should demonstrate the experience of having individuals who are concerned for them. He placed the gift on Nia's lap, and I am concerned about Harper, so this is a gift from both of us. The silence that ensued was not uncomfortable. It was taken aback. The type of silence that envelopes a moment and maintains its stillness. Therefore, you are compelled to experience it in its entirety. Nia's eyes immediately flooded with tears. She did not attempt to conceal it. Soft, steady trails of tears cascaded down her face. She gradually removed the tape from the box, adhering to the same method as when she wishes to preserve paper. A hand-painted infant rattle was concealed within. The letters were barely smudged, and the colors were bright but uneven. It stated, "You are cherished." That concludes the matter. The dam was breached by 3 straightforward sentences. Nia held the rattle to her bosom as if it were made of gold, releasing a quiet laugh through her tears. I gazed at my mother. The smug expression was absent. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in wrath but in confusion. It was as though something had cracked, but she was unsure of what. And I? At the same time, my heart experienced a sensation of enlargement and rupture. Micah turned around, returned to me, and sat down once more, as if nothing had occurred. He leaned against my side, his body heated, and he whispered, "I simply did not wish for her to experience sadness." I rapidly blinked as I ran my fingertips through his hair. I was unable to maintain my composure, as my 8-year-old had recently accomplished an act that generations of women in our family had never been able to accomplish. He spoke up when it was necessary, and he did so with compassion. The silence was so profound that you could once again hear the breeze. The individuals standing in our vicinity were considerably more audible than the leaves wafting through the magnolia trees. Nia continued to weep, but her sobs were silent and unrelenting, not sobbing or shouting. Her hands were encircled around Micah's gift, as if it were the most precious object she had ever held. For the first time in the day, her entire body appeared to relax, as if someone had expressed their appreciation for her. And I truly meant it. I conducted an examination of the yard. Guests who had been snickering minutes ago were now shuffling uncomfortably in their seats. A small number of individuals gazed downward at their beverages. One woman attempted to avoid causing a disturbance by wiping the corner of her eye. There was no longer any laughter. Afterward, my mother became the focal point of attention. Darlene remained seated in her chair, her hand still resting on her glass of tea. Her smile had vanished, but it had not been replaced by wrath. No, that would have been logical. However, I observed something dissimilar in her expression. It was a source of humiliation. Genuine, irrefutable humiliation. Her gaze intersected with mine. There was a brief moment when I believed I observed her recoil. She appeared to be in the mood to express herself in some capacity. However, nothing emerged. This is not even the typical pointed response. Silence. For the first time in my life, my mother did not respond. And it is possible that this is what contributed to the moment's overwhelming magnitude. Darlene was perpetually articulate. She wielded words as if they were weapons. Unforgiving, precise, and slicing. However, what about Micah's unassuming, sincere benevolence? She was unable to provide an argument in response to that. There was nothing to ridicule or manipulate. A young child who spoke from a place of such purity that it disarmed all in the backyard. This includes her. Nia smiled through her emotions as she gazed up at Micah. She whispered, "You have no idea how much I needed that." Micah's countenance was radiant. It was unnecessary for him to comprehend the severity of his recent actions. He merely required confirmation that it was beneficial. And he did. And then, for the first time in hours, I finally stood up. I approached Nia and kneeled beside her, placing my palm on her knee. He declared, "You are not alone," in a voice that was audible to all. I was unconcerned by the cracking of my voice. "You have never been. And no one has the right to humiliate you for choosing to be a mother." Despite the fact that my voice was trembling, I was feeling resilient. When I made the statement, I gazed directly at my mother. For the first time, she did not appear to be confronting me and back. She gazed on in silence, her eyes vacant. I stood up straight and reiterated, "This baby is already more loved than she will ever know, and I don't care who's uncomfortable hearing that." It was located there. The moment I had been anticipating my entire existence, not to undermine my mother, but to finally cease safeguarding her comfort at the expense of another individual's suffering. And the most potent component? I had not initiated it. Micah possessed. My offspring, raised in a loving environment. Through divorce, suffering, and recovery, she had served as a reminder to all in that backyard of the true essence of compassion. In doing so, he instilled in me the belief that I could finally communicate. The audience gradually initiated clapping. Not the dramatic applause of a movie scene, but a genuine one. Sincere. Unprocessed. A few individuals approached Nia to offer her an embrace. She received a tissue from an individual. A few guests began to murmur their apologies. One individual even expressed regret for their earlier laughter. That was incorrect. The atmosphere fluctuated. Not entirely. Not indefinitely. However, this is sufficient to ensure that one can breathe once more. Enough to hold out hope. Quietly, the newborn shower concluded. There was no significant address. There is no dramatic confrontation. Soft conversations, individuals assisting in the packing of remains, and Nia clutching the small, hand-painted rattle, as if it were the most significant gift she had ever received. And it is possible that it was. On that day, Mom did not utter another word. Nia is not the intended recipient. Not to me. Not even to Micah. She remained seated for an extended period, her lips pressed together, observing the manner in which individuals had altered. How the room she once commanded with rolled eyes and biting remarks no longer followed her mood. She eventually stood up, straightened her cardigan, and departed without saying farewell. I will not be dishonest. I experienced a sense of relief as I observed her exit the room. Additionally, there is anguish. Because in my heart I still desired for her to acquire it, to comprehend her actions, to observe the significance of her words, and the way in which they buried the individual she purported to adore. I am uncertain as to whether or not that moment ever occurred for her. She never issued an apology. However, she has not since expressed that level of animosity. That could be a possibility. It is possible that it is insufficient. However, I am aware of the following. I experienced a transformation on that day. I maintained a low profile for an extended period of time. The individual who maintained tranquility. An individual who choked on words to prevent the family from fracturing. However, peace that is maintained at the expense of compassion is not peace at all. It is nothing but silence. Additionally, silence permits the development of harm in the absence of light. Micah imparted this knowledge to me. I continued to contemplate the manner in which he stood, diminutive yet unafraid, demonstrating affection in an environment where judgment had been administered with the precision of a dagger. He refrained from raising his voice. No one was singled out by him. He simply arrived with gentility, and it was more thunderous than any insult could ever be. Additionally, Nia? She has gained strength. She subsequently disclosed that the comment made by her mother was not the sole source of her distress. It was the manner in which everyone permitted it to remain in place, the manner in which it reverberated in the silence. However, Micah's voice? That eliminated it. He presented her with an item that was uncommon in our household. A moment of unwavering support. 2 months later, Harper was born. A full crop of curls, lungs that resembled those of a fire truck, and the same inquisitive eyes that Nia possessed when she was a child. And that rattle that Micah threw? It remains on her vanity, adjacent to a framed photograph of the three of them, Nia, Harper, and Micah. Micah claims that she is his cousin. However, he treats her as if she were his younger sibling. He is always whispering secrets into her tiny ears when he believes no one is looking, and he is protective and playful. And I am acquiring knowledge. Additionally, I continue to unlearn. I am still in the process of determining how to parent a child with compassion, given that I was raised in a harsh environment. However, I take pride in my accomplishments. Not that I am the ideal mother. I am far from it. However, the challenge is to raise a child who recognizes the flaws and does not withdraw from them. A child who envelopes them in affection. I used to think that advocating for someone entailed engaging in a conflict, an argument, or a demonstration of one's point. However, that day I discovered that it can be as straightforward as a gift. A few remarks. An instant of warmth when all others are chilly. Therefore, if you ever find yourself in a situation where an individual is experiencing emotional distress, whether through speech or silence, keep this in mind. At times, the most audible action you can take is to continue to adore someone. I am grateful for your attention to my narrative. Please inform me in the comments if it resonated with you or evoked a memory from your own life. All of them were examined comprehensively. Additionally, your narratives hold a greater significance for me than you may realize. If you are a proponent of compassion, speaking up when it matters and disrupting cycles for the next generation, please share this video with someone who requires it.